The North Shore Drive podcast is back, and it's NFL Combine week. We'll preview the Combine and everything going on with it, what to expect with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and what to look out for a lot of the guys that are down there. We're talking about that here in the North Shore Drive with Ray Fittipaldo. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're both from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo, our esteemed Steelers beat writer here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere podcasts are hosted, but especially on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily content from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes from the North Shore Drive podcast. Ray, it's Combine week. How many Combine? What number Combine will this be for you in your career?
Oh boy, I'm gonna say 6 or 7.
Okay.
I've been on the beat since I think 12, and I've gone pretty much every other year. A couple of years in there with COVID and stuff. But yeah, it's hey, I know there's a lot of Steelers fans out there listening, but even if you're just a general draftnik and you love the draft, this is your time of year, right? So we're gonna have podcasts from out in Indy. We're going to have stories from out in Indy. We're going to have all the bases covered, both in print, online, and with your podcast out there. So if you're a Steelers/NFL draft fan, this is your week.
Absolutely. In full disclosure, we are recording this Sunday morning. So Ray and I, along with Jerry Dulac, we're headed to the Combine Monday. So normally we record on the day of, we record a podcast. We're recording ahead of time. So also for all you Penguins fans out there, that's why we can't talk any Penguins talk today, because the Penguins did a home and home, or a home and away, I guess. But they won big Saturday night, and then they have a home game Sunday night. Andrew Destin was there for the away game. Matt Vensel is in Pittsburgh for the home game. But because of that, we can't talk because they're about to play another team after we record this. So we will get to the Penguins later in the week when we have some time. But I wanted to talk to you, Ray, just getting a full perspective on the Combine. You got to sit in with Daniel Jeremiah and his outlooks. He's a draft expert. He's been looking at things, and he had some thoughts on the Steelers position this year. And you wrote about that for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. What was Daniel Jeremiah's takeaway, and how did it compare with how you've and kind of how our people have seen the Steelers heading into draft season?
Yeah, I mean, we've been writing about it since the end of the season, and Jeremiah agreed. The top 3 needs for the Steelers entering the Combine, and this might change before the draft because we know free agency is going to certainly factor into the way the draft unfolds for them. But he has O-line, D-line, and corner as their top 3 needs. I think that is universally accepted among all Steelers fans, everyone who covers the team. The interesting thing that Jeremiah said, this draft, 2 things. This draft marries well with their needs. So the Steelers have needs at corner, O-line, and D-line. This is a very, very good draft for corners. So it marries with what they need. Also a very, very deep draft for edge rushers, which I think certainly could be in play. Maybe not early, maybe not with 17 or 32, but I think they could take an edge rusher for depth there. And also, depending on the way the Zach Gentry situation unfolds after free agency, this is a tremendous group of tight ends that we have coming out. And he listed a number of tight ends. Let me give you this stat first on the corners. He has 20 corners with a top 3 round grade. Okay.
Whoa. That's not normal.
So if you want to cut that off, I know the draft isn't exact because of the comp picks, but basically 20 of the top 100, 1/5 of his top 100 board, there are corners on there. Also tight ends. I forget the number exactly. I want to say he had 11 tight ends with, I think, top 3 round grades. So if they're looking for a tight end in those middle rounds, I think certainly that could be in play too. So the other interesting thing he said, and I'm sorry to dominate the first half.
You're fine. No, go ahead.
This
The
conversation.
I'm looking for.
4 in the top 80, top 81. He thinks they can get starters with all 4 picks. That's how deep in quality this draft is in the top 3 rounds. So, people are excited for Omar Khan's first draft, Andy Weidl's first draft. It really looks like it's setting up well for the Steelers. Looks like they're going to be able to get quality players with each of those first 4 picks.
And that's the thing that we're looking at here. And again, this is this is part of the interesting part of, when it comes to Omar Khan's trade to get that 32nd pick, having 4 picks in the top 80, 3 in the top 50. That is a big part of where we've been looking at what the Steelers are trying to do with this upcoming offseason. They need to get younger, and they need to get talented, and they need to get nasty in the trenches. Ray, when you see that number, 20 cornerbacks who are graded or are supposed to be good enough to be landed in the first 3 rounds of this NFL draft class, does that make you think wait on cornerback, or does that make you think get the best of this cornerback class?
I think because they have so many needs, we just mentioned the 3 needs. Mm-hmm. So you could actually sit there at 17 and you could take the top graded player at any of those positions. So let's say, Jeremiah didn't think that any of the top tackles would still be there at 17. And I think that's
reasonable.
I think that's very reasonable. So then, he didn't think Joey Porter, Devin Witherspoon, or Christian Gonzalez would be there either. But let's say one of them falls. Mm-hmm. You see Porter so often, like in that 12 to 16 range, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say if Joey Porter falls, they could easily take Joey Porter at number 17. No one would bat an eye if that happened. But if Gonzalez, Porter, and Witherspoon are off the board, then you could say, okay, take the best defensive lineman available. Maybe Lucas Van Ness is there. Mm-hmm. Maybe Miles Murphy is there. So, you would have options there. And then you would have your pick. Okay, number 32, can we get a corner? It might not be a potential shutdown corner or a number 1 corner, but you can get a quality starter at 32. You can make that happen at 49 as well. And Jeremiah, assuming there's not a huge run like in the 60s or 70s, you could potentially get a starter at number 81 as well. And the Steelers know all about that, right? Cam Sutton, in that same range. I forget exactly the number, but back in 2017, he was a 3rd-round pick out of Tennessee. And he's been very, very good. They're going to try to sign him to a 2nd contract here. So you can get starters, quality guys throughout the draft. Even if they had to wait till 81, Chris, it's a very plausible scenario. They can get a quality corner there as well.
Absolutely. And to clarify, you're right. Cameron Sutton was the 94th pick of that NFL draft class. So we're talking about a guy. And the other thing is, for some people that might be saying like, oh, well, he's just starting now. Cameron Sutton was getting valuable snaps as a rookie. When Joe Hayden went down a couple games, he was filling in and being important. And granted, that was also a time when the Steelers were a little bit different at the cornerback position. But I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of guys in this draft class. Like, Emmanuel Forbes is a guy that I think if they can land at 32, that would be a very solid pick. He's a ball hawking cornerback. He's a guy that looks very agile in the secondary. An SEC guy. He's a guy that I look at him like, man. Like, and the thing is like you said, there's a number of cornerbacks out there. Kyle Blue Kelly, who looked really good in the Senior Bowl, 6'1". He's a guy that if you get at 50, I don't think anybody be mad about it. And that's why I think it may be okay for the Steelers to sit back and say, hey, you know what? Unless one of those top super corners fall to them, you don't need to rush to the board and get Kelly Ringo or Cam Smith or one of those guys. Right. If you feel that a Lucas Van Ness, a Brian Brissy, if one of those guys is available to you, or if one of the offensive tackles fall to you, because there's also debate as far as who should be valued at the highest offensive tackles. I want to talk more with you about this, Ray, in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast, because there's a lot of draft preview stuff to go over before this combine happens. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Valley Pool and Spa, the ultimate place for you to go and get a spa, a hot tub, or a sauna installed right in your home. You can relax and soak in a hot tub or swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa right now and get to talk to them. And you go to valleypoolspa.com to find all the options available. One of their specialties is the Finleo sauna that's there to melt your stress away. You get in it, you feel like you're detoxing, you come out a new person, ready to tackle everything in your day, refreshed and rejuvenated and ready to go. And the only way to get that is go to valleypoolspa.com. They're going to help you find all the in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and saunas that have big savings, and find the best options for you to install into your own home. So go to Valley Pool and Spa right now, or visit their website, valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's look again at maybe some of the positions that aren't at the top of the Steelers list right now. You know, we talked about offensive line, we talked about defensive line and corner, but you mentioned tight ends, this being a good class for that. Like Zach Gentry's situation hasn't been resolved, and I think there's a lot of reasons to like Connor Hayward and what he did at the end of the season when he got more playing time. But he's also a smaller bodied guy and more of an H-back that can help at the tight end position.
Right.
If the Steelers don't re-sign Gentry, and they very well could, I do think this is a very interesting tight end class to look at. But how does that weigh versus linebacker and maybe getting a backup edge rusher? Because there's several different positions you could look at and say reasonable for the Steelers to pick, especially with anywhere in their top 80.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Zach Gentry played half the snaps last season.
Yeah.
I mean, he's their best blocking tight end.
Mm-hmm.
They are trending towards being a running team. I don't think that's set in stone, beyond 2023. But certainly, if you look at last season, I think they're going to continue along that vein, and they're going to be a team that runs the ball. So, this draft, I think overall, when you look, Pat Freiermuth came in the middle of the second round, Chris. He was the second tight end off the board that year, right? Mm-hmm. So, looking at it, if you look at Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 prospects, he's got a ton of tight ends in there. I want to say 4 to 5 tight ends in his top 50 prospects. Now, I don't think all of those guys are going to go in the first 2 rounds. Certainly, I don't think all those guys will be off the board by the time the Steelers pick at number 49. So, it's interesting. Michael Mayer is probably the best overall tight end in terms of receiving and blocking. That's probably what the Steelers are looking for, right? They're not looking for a guy like Pat Freiermuth. So, no. Dalton Kincaid, probably the best receiving tight end in this draft. The Steelers don't need someone like him, but they could certainly use a big-bodied guy who can line up in line and block the way Zach Gentry does, should Zach Gentry not be re-signed. So, that's, we'll find out. I think the legal tampering period starts March 15th. So we're only 2 weeks away from that, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have a much better idea of whether tight end really is going to be in play for the Steelers in the draft, but they should have no issue picking up a guy, say, 3rd round or after, 3rd or 4th round, really, because they don't have 5th and 6th round picks as of right now. So 3rd, 4th round, should Gentry not resign, I think that's a perfect spot to grab a number 2 tight end. I shouldn't say backup. I think number 2 tight end, as much as they use a guy like Zach Gentry, they're almost, like a part-time starter.
No, you're exactly right, too, because Pat Freiermuth isn't known for his blocking. And, we've been talking about the possibility of them getting another receiver in this draft class. But what if that answer is getting another tight end that allows Pat Freiermuth to kind of be more of that receiving tight end threat that they could line up in different spots? Because like you said, this team is trending towards being a running team with Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, Kenny Pickett, kind of playing off of that, and the investment in the offensive line. And some of the guys that that everyone's probably going to talk about in this draft class at the tight end position, there are receiving guys, but there's guys like Darnell Washington, the Georgia tight end, who is a big figure, who's there. He's there to block you. He does catch the ball really well, but he can bowl you over. Michael Mayer of Notre Dame, another guy that fits that profile. That he's a talented receiving tight end, but he brings the run blocking. That could bring a really good value to the Steelers if they were able to get prospects like those guys. It doesn't have to be those guys specifically, but someone who's able to help out on the edge, be a run blocker, and then add that versatility. Because if the Steelers were able to run more 12 personnel, where you're seeing double tight end, 2 receivers, and a running back, that could be very perplexing for defenses to deal with. Because we saw that for a time in the Belichick, era when the Patriots were really good with Tom Brady, when they had Rob Gronkowski, and of course Aaron Hernandez for a while. The threat of 2 big receiving options who can block you and be a matchup problem for either smaller, quicker corners or bigger, slower linebackers, that can be a key to key in on the balance problems that teams might have stopping the Steelers.
Yeah, listen, I think they're very comfortable with Zach Gentry, but let's say he moves on in free agency. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can get a guy who's just a little bit better of a receiver than Zach Gentry, and maybe a guy who's just as good of a blocker, right? So then in that scenario, you're all set with the running game. You don't lose a step there, and then you become even more dynamic, not only in the middle of the field, but in the red zone. We saw last year, Chris, if you remember Pat Fryermuth's rookie season, mm-hmm. dynamic in the red zone. One of Ben Roethlisberger's, if not his favorite target, one of his favorite targets down there. And then that kind of disappeared in 2022 for whatever reason, new quarterback, different quarterbacks. That didn't materialize. Pat Fryermuth, there's no reason he can't go back and do what he did as a rookie and score 7, 8 touchdowns in the red zone. I mean, that would be, I think that would make the Steelers a much more dynamic red zone team, and that's certainly something that they're looking to improve this season. So, yeah, lots of possibilities there. You asked me at the top, where would I value it, edge rusher or tight end, depending on those scenarios. I think if you get a good edge rush prospect in the 3rd round, I think you can give TJ Watt some rest. I think you can give Alex Highsmith some rest, and that guy potentially would play more than a Jameer Jones or Malik Reed last season. So, you kind of have to weigh different things. I'm sure they're very well aware of their record without TJ Watt. So they might be placing a little bit more of a premium on edge rusher in this draft, more so than tight end. But I think it's pretty even when you look in terms of what they might need, depending on what happens in free agency. I think it's pretty even with those 2 positions right now.
No, I agree with that, because, like you said, that rotation is so important. If they can get a guy who can, 1, stuff the run off the edge, but also 2, generate some pass rush and give yourself a rotation. Also, rotating defensive front, that speaks to Andy Weidel's model that he was helping build in Philadelphia, that built the Eagles to their Super Bowl run this year. Guys that would fit in that 3rd round range probably would be, I think, guys like Zach Harrison from Ohio State, who's 6'6" and 272 pounds. Now, he's a bigger one. That's more of a hand in the dirt type of guy. But then there's guys I think that fit more of the traditional Steelers edge rusher, who's technically an outside linebacker. Will McDonald IV, a guy who was in the Senior Bowl a bit. Adi Adebawore, a guy from Northwestern who we talked about with Adam Bittner over the weekend. KJ Henry of Clemson, 6'4", 260. Those are guys I think that you could get a look at with that 3rd round pick at 80 and say, you know what, especially if you've got an offensive line, cornerback, and maybe tight end, maybe linebacker with those first 3 picks. That 4th pick still in the 80, you can still get someone with a really good range there. What would you say to if the Steelers get an offensive lineman in the first one, 17th overall, and one of those guys fall to them, and they're like, great, we're happy there, and like a Nolan Smith is sitting there at 32? Is that too early to go and get like another edge rusher who's going to be a backup this season, or is that a good value?
I wouldn't, based off what you said and knowing Andy Weidel's past and the way that he likes to build teams, I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. But I would still say defensive line, like that 5 technique type, a Brissett type at 32 might work better for their needs, or certainly a cornerback at 32 might work better for their needs. And here's a little bit of a wild card scenario. And it probably won't happen if they take a tackle at 17. But Jeremiah noted this on Friday, and it's very true. Early 2nd round, and even mid-second round. But if you look at past drafts, Chris, interior linemen fly off the board in the 30s. And that's just a sweet spot because that's where the value is, right?
Right.
You don't see guards and centers going a lot in the first round. If you do, you see them going in the 20s. But you see a ton of them go off the board, say at like 32 through 40. So is that where they get a guy like Osiris Torrance or Steve Avila or John Michael Schmitz or any of these other guys who are fringe first-round guys, but the value is there in the second round? That's where guards and centers typically go. So I wouldn't put an interior lineman past them either at that point. But to answer your question, I think 32 might be a little bit early for an edge rusher, but hey, if he's the highest guy on their board and they are really going to follow Weidel's model and you're going to have 4 or 5 edge guys who come in and out of the game, then yeah, that certainly could happen.
I'd be very interested to see if that is their path there. The trenches seem like such a big thing on both sides of the ball right now. I want to talk to you, Ray, about Omar Khan, because we're going to get a chance to talk to him, and this is his NFL draft process. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, going to talk to you guys about Yinz's in the Berg. Of course, Yinz's in the Berg is the number one place that you can go to get all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. That's Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt, anything Pittsburgh sports. And hey, maybe if you want to get something to root on the Pens as they're trying to make their playoff push, or Pitt Panthers, who are making a remarkable run. If they win one more game, if they're able to beat Notre Dame this Wednesday, they will win at least a share of the regular season ACC title, something that this program has not done since it's joined the conference. There's a lot of things to root for in Pittsburgh sports right now, and the best place to go to is Yinz's in the Berg. Yinz's in the Berg, again, has 2 stores in the Strip District that you can visit throughout the week. Or if you can't get there, go to yinzerspgh.com. You'll see all the Pittsburgh sports apparel you could want right there on their website, and it updates weekly with new merch. Go to yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. Again, that's Yinzers in the Berg at yinzerspgh.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, our Steelers beat writer, as we both are getting ready to head out to the NFL Scouting Combine. Again, we're recording this on Sunday. We'll be on the road Monday to get there in Indianapolis. Now, Ray, let's take a step back from the prospects themselves, and let's look at Omar Khan and the Steelers. Now, as many people last year, of course, were screaming, why is Kevin Colbert running the draft class when he's about to be leaving? That was the whole point, was the draft process starts as soon as the last one ends. So when Kevin Colbert was running that last draft class, yes, that was his last one, but they had been working on it all year long leading up to that point. Now, this is Omar Khan's first chance. For the entire draft process has been under his front office, that they've been scouting guys since spring practices for college teams last year, going into the summer camps, going into the college season, and now they're going to be able to see what they confirm there. But we've already seen Omar Khan being willing to make moves that shift things with the Steelers, with the Chase Claypool trade to get the 32nd overall pick that they have now. What's your anticipation? I know we're going to talk to him on Tuesday, but what's your anticipation for how aggressive he might be and willing to shake things up in this draft class, whether it be trading up from 17, trading down from 17, or trading up with trading to move around some of those day 2 picks?
Yeah, I think that is more plausible than, say, the Steelers changing the types of players that they draft. Because if you look at it, Mike Tomlin's been here since 2007.
Yeah.
Omar and Andy's job, really, it's to draft players that Mike Tomlin wants to coach, or players that fit his system, both on offense and defense. So, you are drafting players really to fit Mike Tomlin's vision of a football player. That's been the same. I'm sure it's changed between 2007 and 2022, but my point is that's not going to change now because Mike Tomlin is still the head coach. But you bring up a good point. We just got done talking about the depth of this draft, and certainly at certain positions. Could you trade 17 and move back to pick up more picks? You don't have a 5th or a 6th rounder.
Yeah.
Could you potentially get You move back 10 spots, you might be able to pick up, that late first, and then you get another fourth and a fifth, or, whatever the trade chart says. Or you could see a scenario where, hey, maybe Andy Weidel thinks, we all know offensive tackle is a need, right? Maybe Andy Weidel is of the opinion, and Omar Khan is of the opinion that it's a desperate need. And maybe you have to go up into the top 10 or the top 12 to get a guy like Broderick Jones or Peter Skoronski. So, maybe that number 32 pick, maybe that's trade bait, right? Maybe that's a pick that they're willing to get if they think, boy, we really need to solidify left tackle. Or it could be corner, or it could be defensive line. So that's what it's easy, Chris, to know their needs, because a lot of us who follow the team, it's black and white after a while, after you analyze it. But what we don't know is the urgency of those needs, and really the way that Omar and Andy feel about this football team, the nitty gritty details, right? Okay. We all know they've played with Dan Moore for 2 years, but how much do they like him? We don't know that. So, I think you make a good point. I think, trade scenarios could be in place. And as you point out, that trade with Chase Claypool, I don't think that's something that Kevin Colbert would have done. So we are certainly seeing the seas of change here within this front office.
Something that I think that could definitely be in play is, let's say the scenario plays out we talked about earlier, where all the offensive tackles that we think are, first round, A grade dudes are gone. Let's say all those top 3 cornerbacks are gone. And we talked about selecting best player available. That could be the perfect situation where the Steelers say, hey, you know what? What if AJ Richardson's still there, and there's some team that really wants a quarterback, and they're like, we'll trade us. We'll give you the later first round pick, and we'll give you a second or a third or a fourth or something like that. And the Steelers move back, but then pick up that extra pick that you're talking about. I think that there's definitely value there, but there's also the possibility, and I've talked about this with Alan Saunders, but what if the Steelers don't trade anything necessarily on the first day, or even if they do, but they're still sitting there at the end of day one and that 32nd overall pick, and they're just on the clock for 24 hours, and they're just sitting there, and teams are just, the rumors are flying. Who's going to want to move? Because there'll be some, Mel Kiper will have someone saying, this is the best prospect that no one picked, and he's just going to be sitting there, and why didn't anyone take him? He's a steal. Everyone's going to start mobbing over these type of things, and then all of a sudden, I'm sure Omar Khan's phone will start lighting up, and then with the 32nd overall pick, maybe you get multiple second and third round picks for that one. And that's another one you I think with the value we've been talking about, especially what Daniel Jeremiah has been talking about, it may be the most valuable thing if the Steelers are able to maximize keep your day one pick. Do not give up a pick in the first round, but maybe maximizing your day 2 picks in the second and third rounds. Right now they have 3 picks between those, with 2 in the second and 1 in the third. But if they can keep a first round pick, doesn't have to be 17th, and then pick up an extra pick in the second, or an extra pick or 2 in the third, this may be the draft class that helps the Steelers reset so many things that they've been missing out on, whether it be blocking tight ends, younger, aggressive defensive linemen who can stuff the run and help rush the passer, the backup edge rusher situation, cornerback. This might be the chance to address all of those in one draft class.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way this draft looks like it's shaping up, right? I mean, I think you do have a guy like Bryce Young, but there's no, he's not graded as high as Trevor Lawrence. And there's some other nice prospects out there. People talk about Jalen Carter, but you don't see oh boy, that guy is just going to be a stud. There might be 1 or 2 of those guys in the top 10. But this is really it's a draft that has quality depth at a lot of positions. And we ran down cornerback, okay? Interior offensive line, tight ends, running backs. Steelers aren't in play for a running back, really.
Someone else might be.
I don't think, but I just ran down 4 or 5 positions, edge rushers.
Mm-hmm.
And I just ran down 5 positions where there's quality depth at every position. That's half the draft, Chris. So I think your scenario there, accumulating more picks in the second or third round, I would be down with it. But of course, if there's a player that you absolutely want at 17 or at 32,
Yeah.
then you gotta pick that guy if you think he can come in and play for you right away. So these are scenarios that there'll be mock draft scenarios for the Steelers for, couple of weeks, couple of days heading up to that draft. And I'm sure all this will come into play. But yeah, it's certainly fun to talk about here in late February, early March as well.
Absolutely. We'll be covering everything at the NFL Scouting Combine. Myself, Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac will all be on hand. Get all of our coverage at post-gazette.com, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where we'll be on hand there, as well as all things Pittsburgh sports from all of our colleagues on our team here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you in Indy in about 24 hours or so, and we'll be having a good time down there as we get closer to the prospects and the Steelers front office. Until then, everyone have a great week. We'll be back Wednesday with more of the North Shore Drive podcast, but stay tuned for all the content here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Again, Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo signing off.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.